Some 37% of the East Kalimantan province is still covered by forests. But 75% of its economy is land use intensive, with a focus on agriculture, palm oil, logging, coal, oil and gas. And 7 million hectares has been lost to deforestation over the last decade. In recent years, East Kalimantan has developed plans to reduce emissions and become more sustainable. The focus is on measures to achieve zero burning of forests and peat, reduce the impact of logging, rehabilitate degraded forests and peatlands, and using degraded areas for agricultural purposes. However, the main economic drivers of East Kalimantan are today the very same causes of deforestation and forest and peat degradation. Is it possible for East Kalimantan to protect its remaining forests and peatland, while at the same time encouraging economic growth for the benefit of its citizens?
Good morning, selamat pagi. Welcome to the panel on East Kalimantan, Can We Achieve Transformative Change in Forest and Land Use? My name is Timothy Jessup. I'm from the Global Green Growth Institute, and I'll be the moderator today. We have a distinguished group of panelists. Before introducing the panelists, I want to say a few words to introduce East Kalimantan, because it may be that not everyone in the audience is familiar with East Kalimantan and its importance in the world of REDD+. East Kalimantan is one of 5 Indonesian provinces in the island of Borneo. Its forests are among the richest in the world in terms of species diversity. And up until the 1970s, the forests were mostly intact, which means most of the province was covered in forest. Beginning in the 1970s, the forests were opened up to large-scale mechanized logging. And by the 1980s, East Kalimantan was producing most of Indonesia's timber exports. Most of the world's plywood was coming from mills in East Kalimantan. And one of the symptoms of this, or one of the effects of this, that we saw in 1983 and 84 during a severe El Nino period was extensive ground fires and forest fires. And this first brought to the world's attention the problem of these fires. We've since seen 2 major episodes. In addition to chronic fires that have increased, we've seen 2 major episodes of burning with El Ninos in 1997, 98, and most recently 2015 and 2016. Now the remaining forest cover is about 50%, so we can say that since the 1960s, about half of East Kalimantan's forests have been lost, but the good news is that half still remain. So East Kalimantan's in the situation of still having relatively high forest cover, high historical rate of deforestation, and now this is a possible turning point to take a new direction, a new model of development, a green growth model, if you like. And in fact, the province has made very strong commitments to green growth and to REDD. East Kalimantan has been selected by the government of Indonesia to be the pilot province, if you like, for the FCPF Carbon Fund. And some of what we'll talk about today is how climate finance can help the province, the government, the private sector, the communities of East Kalimantan to move onto a new path for green growth and protecting forests. I'd now like to hand the discussion over to Professor Dadi. Professor Dadi is the head of the Provincial Climate Change Council, and he's going to give a brief introduction of the topic of the panel today. Pak Dadi will be speaking in Indonesian, so you might want to put your headsets on.
Silakan, Terima kasih, Pak Tim. Selamat pagi, Ibu-ibu dan Bapak-Bapak yang saya hormati. Kalimantan Timur adalah sebuah provinsi dengan luas wilayah 12,7 juta hektar sejak tahun 2008 berproses untuk melaksanakan transformasi ekonomi. Ada dua alasan kenapa transformasi ekonomi itu dilakukan. Yang pertama, karena maraknya kerusakan lingkungan dan bencana alam pada waktu itu. Dan alasan yang kedua adalah pertumbuhan ekonomi Kalimantan Timur yang dari tahun ke tahun terus menurun. Sebagai gambaran, pada tahun 2011, pertumbuhan ekonomi Kalimantan Timur masih di posisi 6,3%, tetapi pada awal tahun ini, di 2016, pertumbuhan ekonomi Kalimantan Timur telah menurun sampai minus 1,61%. Ekonomi Kalimantan Timur sejak lama ditopang oleh industri minyak dan gas alam, dan kedua komoditas ini potensinya sekarang sudah sangat merosot, sehingga ekonomi Kalimantan Timur beralih ke batubara. Namun demikian kita ketahui bersama harga batubara di pasaran global juga sangat rendah, dan itu berlaku berkepanjangan, sehingga pertumbuhan ekonomi di Kalimantan Timur mengalami kesulitan untuk tumbuh. Ibu-ibu dan bapak-bapak yang saya hormati, selama ini Kalimantan Timur mempunyai komitmen untuk melakukan transformasi ekonomi agar Kalimantan Timur dapat mengelola sumber daya alam dengan lebih baik, dan untuk itu Kalimantan Timur berupaya untuk meningkatkan pertumbuhan ekonominya ke angka 5,2% pada akhir tahun 2018, bahkan meningkat sampai antara 8 sampai 10% di tahun 2030. Sejalan dengan itu, Kalimantan Timur juga berkomitmen untuk menurunkan emisi gas rumah kaca dari sekitar 1.500 ton untuk setiap penerimaan $1 juta PDB ke 1.000 ton untuk setiap $1 juta penerimaan PDB di tahun 2020. Kalimantan Timur memiliki luas kawasan hutan 8,2 juta hektar, dan 5,2 juta hektar diantaranya merupakan kawasan yang berstatus agak kritis, sementara yang berstatus kritis sampai sangat kritis luasnya ada 200.000 hektar. Tingkat deforestasi di Kaltim pada tahun 1996 sampai tahun 2000 itu berada di posisi 870.000 hektar per tahun, sementara degradasi hutan berada pada posisi 139.000 hektar per tahun. Namun demikian, pada tahun 2011-2012, Kaltim berhasil menurunkan deforestasi ke angka 100,2 ribu hektar per tahun, sementara angka degradasi hutan dapat ditekan ke angka 2.000 hektar per tahun. Emisi deforestasi dari Kalimantan Timur untuk kurun waktu 1996 sampai 2012 yang dihitung dengan metode nasional itu jumlahnya adalah 327 juta ton setara karbon dioksida. Sementara dari degradasi hutan jumlahnya adalah 5,1 juta setara karbon dioksida per tahun. Dalam rangka menurunkan emisi dari deforestasi dan degradasi hutan, pemerintah Kalimantan Timur telah menyusun program pembangunan dan tata ruang wilayah yang dapat mendukung pertumbuhan ekonomi hijau. Di samping itu, pemerintah Kalimantan Timur juga telah menyusun rencana pengelolaan hutan dan lahan yang rendah emisi dengan menerapkan struktur dan pola ruang serta kebijakan-kebijakan pendukungnya. Kebijakan lainnya yang ada di Kalimantan Timur dalam rangka pertumbuhan hijau adalah yang pertama, pengembangan program-program unggulan untuk mempercepat peningkatan pertumbuhan ekonomi, kemudian juga pengembangan bidang-bidang pertanian, kemudian bidang pariwisata dan energi baru terbarukan,
Maaf Pak, 1 menit.
Ya, saat ini Kalimantan Timur ditetapkan sebagai satu-satunya provinsi di Indonesia untuk pelaksanaan uji coba pengurangan emisi karbon berbayar. Dalam konteks itu, bersama-sama dengan Kementerian Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan, Kalimantan Timur telah menyusun dan menyerahkan dokumen awal yang disyaratkan, yaitu dokumen Emission Reduction Program Idea Note pada bulan April yang baru lalu. Saat ini telah banyak pihak yang menjalankan program Kaltim Hijau di Kalimantan Timur, baik itu di tingkat provinsi maupun di tingkat kabupaten, dan dalam rangka menguatkan komitmen para pihak yang ada itu, maka pada bulan Mei yang baru lalu Kalimantan Timur mendeklarasikan Green Growth Compact, yaitu satu penguatan komitmen dan kerjasama lapisan masyarakat, pemerintah provinsi, pemerintah kabupaten kota, pemerintah nasional, dan mitra-mitra pembangunan untuk melaksanakan pembangunan hijau di Kaltim ke depan. Terima kasih, Pak Tim.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much, Professor Dadi. Could we have the slide now with the panelists' names? I will ask a first round of questions, one to each panelist. Each panelist will have 2 or 3 minutes to answer. We'll then do a second round of questions. After the second round of questions, I would like to offer an opportunity to a distinguished guest who's in the audience, the governor of West Kalimantan, who will give us his perspective. After hearing the discussion about East Kalimantan, we'll get a perspective from a neighboring province of West Kalimantan. It's an honor that you're here, sir. Thank you. After that, we'll open questions from the audience. So our first panelist will be Pak Riza. Pak Riza is the head of the Provincial Environment Agency. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I'd like to ask you about East Kalimantan's goal for maintaining forests. What is the goal? How much forest does East Kalimantan want to keep? And why? What is the purpose of maintaining forests? Who does it benefit? And particularly, what is the most important thing that the government can do to achieve the goal? Thank you.
Terima kasih. Maaf saya menggunakan bahasa.
Tidak usah minta maaf, Pak.
Selamat pagi, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian. Pertama-tama saya mengucapkan terima kasih kepada pemerintah Norwegia yang telah mengundang kami untuk berbicara di sini, berbagi pengetahuan dan pengalaman pelaksanaan REDD Plus di Provinsi Kalimantan Timur. Saya juga memohonkan maaf untuk Pak Gubernur Kaltim tidak bisa hadir secara langsung di sini, diwakili oleh kami karena keadaan beliau masih sakit. Baik, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, untuk diketahui Provinsi Kaltim dengan luas 12,7 juta hektar, 50% masih berupa hutan, yang mana berupa kawasan hutan produksi, kawasan hutan konservasi, hutan lindung, dan hutan kemasyarakatan. Nah, untuk menjaga itu, kita di Provinsi Kaltim telah mengatur melalui peraturan daerah, yang mana yang paling penting yang berhubungan dengan hal ini adalah pertama yaitu rencana jangka menengah untuk Provinsi Kaltim. Yang kedua adalah rencana tata ruang provinsi yang telah disahkan oleh legislatif di daerah. Dan yang ketiga yang paling penting untuk jangka pendek ini adalah kita kenal dengan moratorium izin baru untuk kehutanan, pertambangan, dan kebun. Ini yang kita lakukan untuk ke depan. Bapak Ibu sekalian, untuk hutan gambut, untuk diketahui di Kaltim hanya sedikit dari 12,7 juta hektar itu hanya 332.000 hektar yang ada di 3 kabupaten, yaitu Kabupaten Kutai Kartanegara, Kutai Timur, dan Kutai Barat. Dan 72.000 hektar telah ditetapkan sebagai kawasan lindung untuk PIT ini, untuk gambut ini oleh Bupati Kutai Kartanegara dan mungkin menyusul untuk kabupaten lain yang ada di Kalimantan Timur. Dan Bapak dan Ibu sekalian,
1 menit, Pak.
Kita juga merasa perlu untuk memberikan kesempatan kepada masyarakat lokal melalui perhutanan sosial, yang mana kita telah membuat 2 hutan tanaman rakyat, 10 hutan kemasyarakatan, dan akan lagi membuat 299.000 hektar untuk perhutanan sosial di luar kemitraan. Mungkin itu, Pak Tim. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Pak Riza. Our next panelist is Ms. Tiza Mafira from the Climate Policy Initiative. She's going to talk about fiscal policy and its importance for REDD+. So my first question for you is, to what extent can fiscal policies, whether they're national or provincial, encourage or discourage land uses in East Kalimantan? And what are some of the best opportunities for fiscal reform to promote or achieve REDD+ goals?
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to the Norwegian government for inviting me, and it's a huge honor to be here. Good morning, everybody, distinguished guests. I believe that I'm here because Climate Policy Initiative continues to work jointly together with the Ministry of Finance to look into options to improve fiscal policies in order to support sustainable land use. And one of the most recent joint works that we've done with the Ministry of Finance looks into exactly how revenue collections and revenue sharing between the central government and the regional government might impact land use allocations and land use decision making. Now, we found some very, very interesting potential correlations, and if I could just give you an illustration, could we put up just one slide that I have here? Yeah. So on your left is a graph of tax and non-tax revenue collections. And the little orange line that you see coming down is the amount of revenue collections that puts a burden on land size. So let me repeat that again. It levies land expansion. That's just the orange line. So that's 6.5% of total revenue. The other 93.5% of total revenue collections puts a burden on production. So everything that's income tax, export tax, that puts a burden on production. So what we see here is that from a company perspective, they're not too discouraged from land expansion. We're not saying that they're necessarily encouraged to expand land, but they're certainly not being discouraged. Okay, so that's one picture. To your right is a graph of revenue sharing. So the revenue sharing is a mechanism by which the central government gives back to the regional government part of the revenue that was generated from the regional government. Yeah. Now, this graph specifically shows tax collections from the palm oil sector. And the little line that you see going to the right of you, that is how much of total revenue from taxes goes back to the regional government. It is only 11% of total taxes from palm oil. And where does that 11 to 14% come from? It comes from mostly property tax. So everything else, export tax, corporate income tax, value-added tax, does not get back to the regional government. It stays with the central government. Yeah? Okay, so what this shows is that from a regional government perspective, there's also pretty much a big incentive to keep expanding land because they get a lot of revenue from that. So I think in terms of opportunities to improve fiscal policies, this might be a good start. But most importantly, we need to continue discussions with the Ministry of Finance and continue discussions with subnational governments. And in this case, CPI is working in East Kalimantan together with TNC to do exactly that. Okay. Thank you, Tim. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Tiza. Could we have the names of panelists again, please? So speaking of TNC, our next speaker is from the Nature Conservancy. Dr. Herlina Hartanto has been working in East Kalimantan, particularly with local communities. And I'd like to ask, in relation to East Kalimantan's goals, REDD Plus or Green Growth Goals, we know that not only TNC, but many international, national, local NGOs or CSOs are active. But of course, the main actors are not the NGOs, the main actors are the communities. I understand there's some 1,000 communities in East Kalimantan, many of them, if not most, are forest dependent. So what would you say are the roles of the CSOs? And maybe you could give us an insight into why forests are important for local people, not just in terms of climate change, but in terms of livelihoods, cultures, and other values. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Tim, for the questions. I'm honored to be here with all these distinguished panelists. Let me talk a bit about the civil society organization first. So the CSO in East Kalimantan indeed has been quite active. And the reason is because the East Kalimantan government really created a space for us to take part. Certain NGOs may play a very specific role, such as undertaking analytical work, policy advocacy, providing technical advice and capacity building to forest and land managers. Others play a wider range of roles, including the Nature Conservancy. So since we worked in East Kalimantan 15 years ago, TNC has been undertaking work at different levels. So at the jurisdictional level, we have been supporting Indonesian government, in particular the Brau government, in implementing and in designing and implementing a jurisdictional REDD Plus initiative, which is called the Brau Forest Carbon Program. And now we are very excited to work with Prof. Dedi, Pak Riza, and also the Governor Awang Farouk to really support the government to achieve their green Kaltim or the Green East Kalimantan visions, which was declared in 2010 through what we call the Green Growth Compact. And we really see our role as a CSO to really support the government, to keep them at the forefront, to bring together key actors from private sectors, from public sectors, and also the communities and CSO to really assist their development at the jurisdictional level. Now, second, within that jurisdictional program, we also implemented several strategies to really speed up or to really support the green development visions. One of the strategies, for example, to strengthen conservation efforts. A second strategy is actually to improve the sustainable productions. And third is really to help the community at the local level to also implement the green growth strategies. I would say that each of those strategies have also a very strong policy focus as we integrate them into the broader jurisdictional approach and also to seek how to actually scale impacts. And East Kalimantan has been very fortunate as the donor communities have been very supportive to East Kalimantan, and I think we are here, very grateful to the support, including the Norwegian government, the US, the German, the Australia, Sweden, and also the foundations such as the Packet Foundations. And I think related to this funding, Tim, my last point is that as another role that CSO could play is actually to help position donor projects and also these funding sources. And this is because CSO, like us and other CSO, have very long engagement in places where we work. And for example, TNC and WWF, we play a role as the swap partners for the Indonesians and the US government in this debt for nature swap between the Indonesian and the US government that actually bring $28.5 million that can actually be tapped by the local, the national NGOs, universities, and also community groups to really help implementing the REDD Plus and also the Green Growth Initiative. So hopefully later on, the second round of questions, I can talk more a bit about the local communities.
Thanks very much, Dr. Herlina. Our next panelist is Ida Greenberry. Ida is the Managing Director for Sustainability with Asia Pulp and Paper, or APP. So my question to you in the first round, Ida, is about the changing paradigm shift or changing way of operations of companies such as APP? Because we know historically extractive industries such as logging and mining in East Kalimantan, particularly logging, which opened the forest, was followed by forest conversion for, among other purposes, plantations. So one could say plantation expansion has contributed a great deal to deforestation historically, but now we're facing a turning point, possibly a new business model for companies such as APP. Could you tell us how your operations in a practical way have actually changed and will change in East Kalimantan?
Okay, thanks, Steve. Good morning, everybody. Ida. We ended deforestation in 2013, in February 2013. And one of the reasons why we ended deforestation across our supply chain, 100%, is basically to help us to create the building blocks to create a more sustainable business model. Our policy to end deforestation is called Forest Conservation Policy, also widely known as our Zero Deforestation Policy. It basically includes not just turning off the chainsaw, but it's also to identify where the forests are using high conservation value, high carbon stock methodology, and to protect it and also to expand it. In addition to that, we also committed to protect forested peat and identify the best practice for peatland management, free and prior informed consent, and also conflict resolution. So a lot of people assume that zero deforestation is just about turning off chainsaw and stop cutting natural forests. It's actually not that. It's actually the implementation of the whole package. We will not destroy forest while respecting the local community. The overarching principle behind all our commitment in our zero deforestation policy is basically a landscape approach. In the most basic terms, basically, that conservation efforts cannot be limited to administrative boundaries and will only succeed if sustainability as a whole is being implemented in the landscape. One of the initial steps in our implementation of the landscape approach is, of course, the finalization of integrated sustainable forest management plan, which involves stakeholders and consultation with stakeholders in every stages of this development. In East Kalimantan, as an example, in Indonesia, across our supply chain, through our integrated sustainable forestry management plan, for example, we increase the protected area for natural forests, for example, by more than 20% across supply chain. And that's just the protected natural forest. But in addition to that, very importantly is how to manage our pulpwood plantation. Pulpwood plantation cannot just be business as usual. Pulpwood plantation can also manage according to the high conservation values, according to the peat condition, according to the social communities and everything else. So we've been very honored to be able to support East Kalimantan, and we've been partnering with, especially with the jurisdictional approach, we've been partnering with South Sumatra Governor and West Kalimantan Governor, who also here today.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to the second round of questions with the same order of panelists. So the next question is for Pak Riza, head of the Provincial Environment Agency. East Kalimantan has already developed a project idea note for the FCPF Carbon Fund and is now developing the full project design or program design. So my question, Pak Riza, is if East Kalimantan receives finance from the Carbon Fund, how would that money be used? And what additional funds might come as commitments from the government, and possibly what would you see as contributions from private investment?
Ya, terima kasih Pak Tim. Sebenarnya Carbon Fund ini adalah pendanaan karbon yang diberikan berbasis kinerja. Bukan ada uang baru kerja, tetapi kerja dulu ada hasilnya berupa pengurangan karbon, emisi karbon baru dibayar. Itu yang harus kita pahami bersama. Jadi tidak mendanai secara langsung kegiatan yang akan dilakukan dalam waktu dekat.
Payment for performance.
Iya, betul. Apabila Provinsi Kaltim mendapatkan bantuan ini, maka kita akan melaksanakan program-program antara lain adalah pengelolaan hutan yang lestari melalui yang namanya pengelolaan unit kesatuan pengelolaan hutan atau KPH yang dikenal di Indonesia. Yang kedua, untuk pengelolaan hutan dan kebun serta tambang yang lestari dan rendah emisi karbon. Itu. Yang ketiga adalah untuk penguatan kelompok masyarakat dalam pengelolaan hutan kemasyarakatan, pengelolaan ekosistem rawa gambut, serta penyiapan kerangka pengamanan sosial dan lingkungan hidup atau social and environmental safeguard, serta yang terakhir adalah penguatan proses MRV untuk emisi karbon. Mungkin itu Pak Tim yang kami lakukan.
Yep. Thank you, Pak. The next question is for Ibu Tiza. So following up on your very interesting presentation of what fiscal policies or instruments are available, maybe you could step back a bit and say, well, why is climate change an important issue for East Kalimantan in Indonesia, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from a perspective of fiscal policy, financial security, and development sustainability?
Sure, Tim. I mean, the climate change issues have generated a huge support in terms of funding from international donors. And it's true that what Pak Riza said is very pertinent, the fact that most international grants come in the form of performance-based payments. And what this means is that the regional governments, or the government institution that will be receiving these funds, must have capital to perform the actions, the results that will be adequate to have the donors disperse the grants, right? So the question is, where does this capital come from? Where does the government start sourcing these funds? And the first place to look, I believe, is to look at the existing fiscal system and see whether it can be improved without necessarily needing to make any regulatory big reforms, but whether it can be improved to secure that kind of funding that's necessary. So for East Kalimantan, for example, what we're looking to do in East Kalimantan is to work with the subnational government there and look at what it is that they actually need. What kinds of commitments, such as the kinds of commitments that Pak Riza has been saying, in order to utilize the grant money, how can these commitments be achieved? How much is needed, and where do they get it from? So we could look at, we could look at many things. We could look at just switching budgeting allocations. We could look at data improvement so that it would be easier for the regional government to argue for more central fund transfers to the regional government. We could even look at advocating more earmarked transfers in the form of special allocation funds or adjustment funds. There are a multitude of options that we need to look at, but we need to start talking about those options, and the regional government needs to start understanding the magnitude of options that are available. The other thing that I would add, the last thing, is that for donors, they also need to be very, very clear as to what exactly are the results that they're expecting. What exactly is going to get that money out? Because this is very important for East Kalimantan and other regional governments, is a certainty that, okay, I'm going to put in this much capital, I'm going to use that to do this, because I'm sure that if these things are achieved, that money is going to come from donors. So that's the kind of certainty that will get things moving, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Dr. Herlina, I'd like to follow up on my earlier question. I actually I put two questions into one, which wasn't fair, but the second part was not so much about the CSOs, but the communities themselves. Why are forests important to people in East Kalimantan? Why should they care if half of it is gone, and why should they want to protect the other half?
Yeah, thanks for the questions, Tim. So to give a bit of a background, there are about 1,000 villages in East Kalimantan, and the total population in East Kalimantan is about 3.5 million people. 10% of the populations in rural areas is actually considered poor. And from that 1,000 villages, about 135 villages are actually located inside and around the forest. And some of the community members within those villages are still heavily dependent on the forest for their livelihood and also a part of their cultural identity. One Punan village that we've been supporting so far, for example, in certain months of the year, when we visited the village, everybody's gone. And this is during the honey and the fruiting seasons, because all the villages actually went inside the forest to collect those forest products. But if you look at those villages, even the most remote villages, they still need development. They want to have school for their children. They want to have health clinics if they get sick. They want to have houses with toilets in it. And they also wanted to develop, in most cases, land-based livelihood that may later on, contribute to forest degradations and deforestations. So it is crucial that the concept of green growth that we've been talking about is also embraced at the village level. Now, while it is important to think about how the forest-dependent communities in East Kalimantan can contribute to green growth initiative at the provincial level, I think it is also as important, if not more important, to think how this green growth initiative can actually improve their well-being. And now, to do that, TNC has developed a village green growth approach, what we call SIGAP, or the inspirational actions by community to affect change. And by using this example, approach, for example, a village in Berau, Merabu, it is called. This is the village that some of our Norwegian colleagues and the minister actually managed to visit a couple of months ago. This village, by using this approach, actually can produce green growth visions for the future that they agreed together. They also agreed on how, if they want to build rice fields or rubber plantations, where they should locate those livelihood, the land-based livelihood. And if somehow they also agreed how many hectares each household will have if they want to establish the different kind of cash crop or plantations, and they hold themselves accountable to their village land use agreement. So the village land use planning processes also enable the villages to actually identify the area that they want to protect. And this village, Merabu, is actually the first village in Berau that managed to get management rights over 35 years through what's the government call the village forest or the Hutan Desa program. And this SIGAP approach is actually highly replicable to other contexts and other places. And so far it has been replicated by by our NGO partners in 30 villages across Berau and also East Kutai Timur.
It's only 970.
Yes,
No.
yes. Pretty easy.
Okay, thank you. Ibu Aida, back to you. So you spoke very eloquently about the commitments that APP has made to stop deforesting and not only no longer contribute to deforestation but become sustainable. I'd like you to step back a bit and look at the private sector as a whole, not just your company. What do you see as the contribution the private sector can make in East Kalimantan to achieving these goals? And that's not just the goal of deforestation or climate mitigation, but also of economic growth and development.
I think with the existence of IPOP and also other organizations with APP in Sumatra, for example, with April, they're on sometimes on the same landscape. I think it's inevitable that we need to work together. So if those companies in East Kalimantan can actually step back and look at the whole landscape, like I said before, conservation efforts do not recognize administrative boundaries. So you just look around. So who's managing this land? Who's managing that land? Who's managing that land? And what is the strategy for that particular landscape? And everybody actually contribute to that particular actions that we all agreed, forest conservation or community engagement and everything else. Then I think we can be a very good asset to the province, as long as we also committed to address issues in the landscape, not just in our concessions. Again, it's very important to stress that conservation of anything, peat, forest, anything, do not recognize boundaries. So yeah, better collaborations with partners from private sectors is definitely key, and also invest. I mean, APP is not the only company in the world who used natural resource in the past to grow. I think almost all companies globally actually use natural resource to grow in the past. So it's not just about addressing a legacy, but it's beyond that. It's also investing in our own landscape to make sure that our business remains sustainable in the future. We need to invest. I mean, for the zero deforestation policy, APP, we invested more than $200 million, and then for the landscape, we invested more than $10 million a year that we're channeling through Belantara Foundation. So it's being managed independently from APP. So this is how we try to give back. And if everybody in the landscape actually try to give back for the better of the province, I think success is just around the corner. But everybody must collaborate.
Okay. Well, we get the message. We all must collaborate. We're honored to have in the audience the governor of West Kalimantan. We have a slide to introduce him. Pak Cornelis, Pak Gubernur, yang saya hormati, I would like to offer an opportunity to give your perspective from a different province, West Kalimantan, having heard the discussion about East Kalimantan, the ambitious goals to stop deforestation, improve sustainable management of forest and land, while still achieving a high rate of economic growth. Maybe you could give us your perspective from West Kalimantan. What's different and what's similar? Please take 5 minutes, Pak, to give us your perspective.
Baik, Bapak Ibu. Mati ke barang nih. Baik, Bapak Ibu dan saudara-saudara yang saya hormati, pada kesempatan yang berbahagia ini, saya bicara dalam kapasitas saya sebagai Koordinator Gubernur Climate and Forest Task Force Indonesia, atau yang biasa dikenal sebagai GCF Task Force. Saya mewakili 6 gubernur yang tergabung dalam Satuan Tugas GCF Indonesia, yaitu Papua, Papua Barat, Kalimantan Timur, Kalimantan Tengah, Aceh, Kalimantan Barat. Nah sekarang tambah Kalimantan Utara, karena dulu Kalimantan Utara masih tergabung dalam Kalimantan Timur. Dan selain itu juga saya adalah selaku Presiden Masyarakat Adat Dayak Nasional. Karena rata-rata yang tinggal dalam hutan di Kalimantan Barat itu adalah orang Dayak. Nah jadi dalam kesempatan yang baik ini kita sepakat bagaimana supaya dunia ini tidak terlalu panas. Nah, apa yang kita lakukan, apa yang kita upayakan di sini, saya senang sekali. Karena saya perhatikan pemerintah Norwegia sangat konsen dalam persoalan ini. Dan kita juga sebagai warga dunia, kita masih sedih juga. Karena para kepala negara belum ada kesepakatan, baik dia protokol Kyoto maupun di Copenhagen. Nah kami para gubernur sepakat 200 gubernur di Los Angeles, California, untuk menurunkan gas rumah kaca ini. Sehingga bumi kita tidak terlalu panas. Nah upaya-upaya yang dilakukan ini semua intinya bagus. Saya sepakat kita bersama-sama. Masyarakat, pemerintah, ya, lembaga-lembaga swadaya masyarakat, lalu para pengusaha, negara-negara industri maju, sepakat kita menjaga dunia jangan sampai terlalu panas. Kalau naik aja 1 derajat, apa yang akan terjadi? Dunia bisa kiamat. Nah, oleh karena itu upaya-upaya yang dilakukan, saya sependapat, setuju apa yang dilakukan oleh teman-teman kita dari Kalimantan Timur, dari belahan dunia lainnya. Jadi kita yang paling intinya adalah kita bisa bekerja sama dengan semua pihak. Dan kita tidak perlu saling tekan atau saling menyalahkan. Dan kami terus terang aja Kalimantan Barat ketika pemerintah Norwegia memberikan pendanaan, saya selaku gubernur Kalimantan Barat, saya menolak. Kami bisa kerja dengan gotong royong. Tapi sekarang bagaimana kita semua pihak ambil bagian. Sehingga Kalimantan ini sebagai paru-paru dunia bisa kita jaga. Sehingga masyarakat dunia juga bisa selamat. Tapi yang menjaga juga jangan sengsara. Tapi intinya adalah faktor kemiskinan. Nah, dengan kemiskinan ini kita atasi bersama-sama. Hutan kita bisa jaga, kita bisa pelihara. Sehingga karbonnya atau napas dari pohon-pohon ini bisa menjaga dunia sehingga tidak terlalu panas. Itu saja intinya saya rasa. Tapi yang paling penting adalah kerjasama di semua lapisan, di semua tingkatan. Tingkat pemerintah pusat, kepala negara, gubernur, bupati, wali kota, camat, kepala desa, organisasi-organisasi sosial kemasyarakatan, dunia usaha, negara-negara maju, negara berkembang, sama-sama kita bekerja dan saling menguntungkan. Saya rasa itu aja intinya. Dan atas upaya semua ini, saya ucapkan terima kasih dan penghargaan yang setinggi-tingginya, terlebih lebih kepada pemerintah Norwegia yang sangat perhatian terhadap lingkungan ini, terhadap perubahan iklim dunia ini. Terima kasih. Selamat pagi, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua.
Terima kasih Pak Gubernur. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your comments. Now we have time for questions from the audience. So I'd like to see a show of hands. I'll pick 3 questioners. Please keep your questions brief. State who you are and what organization you're affiliated with. And please say who the question is directed to. So we'll ask the panelist who's the target of the question to answer, and then I'll ask if any other panelists want to comment. So we have one questioner here. Please step over here to the microphone. Second one. Anybody else? Okay. Maybe you'll think of questions later. Oh, yes, sorry, one in the back. Yes, number 3, thank you.
My name's Eric. I'm a student at the University of Sheffield, and here under the capacity of Global Leaders Initiative as a policy analyst. My question goes to the lady and our panelist from the Fiscal Policy Department. And my question is directed to looking at, you raised an intricate issue with regards to donor funding not being, or donors not being really clear on the results that they actually expect. Is that a shared consensus that most government institutions face within your country? And if that's the case, what best strategies would you propose that would make that particular dilemma clearer and also improve the implementation of REDD in a larger scale? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ibu Tisa?
Okay.
I think that's for you.
Thank you for the question. I think on whether that is a shared consensus, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a consensus. But it has occurred a lot of times in discussions with government institutions, and perhaps Pak Dadi or Pak Riza could speak more on behalf of the government. There definitely have been moments where the government has been at loss as to, a little bit confused as to exactly what steps they needed to take in order to merit the disbursement of the funds. And of course, without putting blame on any party, I think that the solution would be to intensify discussions beforehand prior to signing, signing of a letter of intent or a memorandum of understanding is easy enough, but after that there needs to be very, very intensive and focused discussions guided by a framework of what needs to be agreed upon. And this framework is, I think, what is probably missing or either not uniform across different funds. And perhaps the government doesn't have a template either on what exactly needs to be discussed. Yep. So it's very pertinent. We need to discuss these issues and what kind of things need to be discussed in that intensive negotiation. But I do know that the central government in particular, with Norway, is also on the verge of discussing an environmental and climate change fund that will be formed in the shape of a public services agency by the Ministry of Environment. So it's upcoming. It's an upcoming issue that would be interesting for everyone to follow, because exactly these kinds of questions will come up.
Okay. And would you say that not only the donor and the host government should be discussing this, but it should be open to public exposure and input from stakeholders? Yes,
because the end user is the public and the stakeholders, the end user of those funds. And so the government will need to know whether the end user can also use the funds in accordance with what the grantor imagines that fund to be used as. So usually there are lots of parties involved. The money goes to the government. The government disperses it through an intermediary, usually banks or non-financial institutions. These banks and non-financial institutions also need to know what their role is. Yep. And then the banks and non-financial institutions would then extend it to end users either as credit, as soft loans or as grants and other things. They also need to know what they need to do with it. So you can imagine how complex this process is and how there really needs to be a strong understanding between all these parties.
Okay. Would any of the other panelists like to respond to the question or add anything? No? Okay. We'll go to the next questioner.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Professor Dadi, please take a couple of minutes.
Ya, terima kasih Tim. Kalimantan Timur telah memanfaatkan sumber daya alam sejak lama secara ekstraktif tanpa mengindahkan prinsip-prinsip kelestarian lingkungan. Oleh karena itu kerusakan lingkungan yang hebat di Kalimantan Timur menuntut pemerintah Kalimantan Timur untuk dapat memperbaikinya. Oleh karena itu sebelum program REDD lahir, Kalimantan Timur telah berupaya untuk melestarikan lingkungan dengan secara sukarela karena itu kebutuhan. Oleh karena itu apabila ada sekarang kesempatan bagi Kalimantan Timur untuk mendapatkan pendanaan dari program pengurangan emisi, tentu itu akan lebih baik lagi. Dan dana itu seperti dijelaskan oleh Pak Reza tadi, utamanya hanya diperuntukkan bagi dua hal. Yang pertama adalah memperbaiki sumber daya hutan, dan yang kedua meningkatkan kesejahteraan masyarakat yang tinggal di dalam dan di sekitar hutan. Terima kasih, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Professor. We'll go now to the second question. Tell us your name and where you're from and who the question is directed to.
Okay, my name is Paulo Barreto. I'm from Brazil. I work in a research institute. In case of Brazil, the reduction of deforestation in part was due to the realization that we had already excessive deforestation, a lot of degraded lands, and now there is several efforts to invest in increasing productivity of those lands, but there are several barriers. So I wonder, in your case, if this realization is there already, and what are the barriers in the efforts to deal with increasing productivities in these degraded lands? What are the efforts in that area?
Is your question directed to anyone in particular, or
I
is
don't know
it
specifically who is more capable, but
okay? Maybe Ibu Ida, would you like to try, since you have talked about better efficiency and productivity in the plantation sector?
The first barrier is basically education. I mean, like companies like ours, we employ about 100,000 people, and they're not. Their level of education is their variation. So educating contractors on how to harvest the wood efficiently and stuff like that is definitely an ongoing effort. Number two is which has been mentioned in earlier session, is basically how we engage with the community, how to resolve conflicts, how we resolve claims, which would limit the area where you can work on. Number three depends on where you're operating, but some of our areas is basically located on peatland. That also presents some kind of challenges in increasing the productivity of our pulpwood. That is why we've been deploying a team to have a look at some of the alternative species for pulpwood plantations that could be flood tolerant, because we have started to re-wet our area since last year with building dams and canal blockings and stuff like that. I think that's from my industry. Yeah.
Okay, thanks Ibu Aida. Would anyone else like to, Pak Riza?
Ya, terima kasih. Apakah daerah kami siap untuk menerima carbon fund itu? Secara tegas saya katakan iya. Bukan saja ini akan, tetapi kami sudah melakukan contoh yang kami lakukan seperti di Bentang Alam Wehea di Kutai Timur dan desa-desa yang ada di Merabu, yang mana Menteri Lingkungan Hidup dan Iklim Norwegia pernah menginap satu malam Pak Tim di situ. Nah ini sudah terjadi kerjasama yang baik antara pengusaha, masyarakat adat, pemerintah daerah dan pemerintah pusat jadi satu untuk mengelola hutan, melindungi hutan secara terpadu. Itu sudah ada contoh, dan apabila itu mendapat bantuan akan lebih cepat lagi prosesnya. Kalau di Merabu itu lebih untuk melindungi kawasan Kars atau Gunung Kapur yang di sana merupakan sumber air untuk masyarakat sekitar. Di situ sudah ada masyarakat lokalnya, ada perusahaan yang ikut melindungi juga, apalagi pemerintah daerahnya dan pemerintah provinsi. Jadi untuk kesiapan kami katakan kami sudah siap untuk hal itu. Apabila dibantu oleh dana karbon ini, maka ini akan mempercepat. Terima kasih, Pak.
Ya, Profesor Dadi.
Tanah-tanah di daerah yang beriklim tropis basah semuanya memiliki sifat yang rentan terhadap erosi. Oleh karena itu apabila penutupan lahan berupa hutan itu hilang, maka tanah itu akan kehilangan kemampuannya untuk berproduksi. Oleh karena itu pada lahan-lahan yang terlanjur telah terdegradasi, maka langkah pertama yang harus dilakukan adalah menutup kembali lahan-lahan itu dengan berbagai tanaman yang cepat tumbuh, sampai akhirnya sifat fisiknya menjadi lebih baik dan bisa ditanami dengan tanaman produktif yang bernilai ekonomi. Terima kasih.
For me, just to add on the comments from the other panelists, to increase productivity of cash crops, there are some technical issues that can be more easily resolved. For example, the high quality seedlings and things like that. But there are also other social issues that, it's more challenging. And I think in East Kalimantan and just like other parts of Indonesia, it's very difficult to find places that the private sectors can just invest and build plantations where community actually does not exist. And the issues, I think, in most cases, is that because the community was not engaged early on, they were not given a voice on whether or no they want to be involved in the plantations or other land-based, large-scale development. And what it leads, as Aida mentions, is land conflicts. And in places when conflicts occur, then for sure, you cannot expect any kind of progress that will take place, leave alone increased productivity. So I would say that we really have to tackle both the technical issues about soil compatibility, seedlings, capacity buildings, but the social processes have to be taken care of too.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Herlina. The third question, we had a third questioner, yes? And then we'll have time for a fourth.
Yes, I'm Amy Duchel from the Center for International Forestry Research in Indonesia. And my question is mainly for Erlina, but I think maybe others can respond. And the question is, you have all this very rich experience on the ground in Barao, all these lessons learned. What are the mechanisms in place for getting this out there to the higher levels? And is there uptake by the national government in terms of learning from this experience to actually influence national level policy?
Sure. Thanks so much, Amy. I'll just respond directly, Tim.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we try different avenues, Amy, to try to get our results out there. And I think the best experience that we have so far is actually to let the community members tell the stories themselves. This is the most effective mechanisms that we observe so far. So in certain cases where, for example, the community felt that they really wanted to protect a certain forest, which is actually assigned for plantations or for mining or for other development, what we did is actually to bring those villages to have a direct communications with the district government, with the provincial government, and even the national government to the ministry. And it's so encouraging to actually see that actually all these governments quite open-minded and quite open to the voice of the community so far. And apart then that avenue, we try as much as possible to actually put our lessons learned and then present it in different avenues or different forums. At the provincial level and also at the district level, there are REDD Plus working groups that actually an effective platform that we can actually share all those informations. And so far, I think we cannot rely on one avenue alone. We have to have multiple avenues to get the results out there. So.
Okay. Would any of the other panelists like to add to that? No? Okay. Yes, Pak
Terima
Rizal.
kasih Pak Tim. Saya untuk menambahkan saja untuk replikasi kepada daerah lain atau desa lain yang sudah dilakukan oleh kita Provinsi Kaltim, pemerintah Kaltim. Sebetulnya dari sukses story dari Bentang Alam Wehea dan Merabu ini, pihak kami akan melakukan replikasi lebih ke 12 desa lagi yang akan kita olah seperti yang terjadi di Wehea dan Merabu. Masalahnya adalah di sini tinggal komunikasi antara pemerintah pusat, pemerintah provinsi maupun pemerintah daerah kabupaten kota yang mau menyemajukan daerahnya. Saya katakan bahwa majunya satu daerah itu apabila ada komunikasi antara masyarakat setempat, jadi dikatakan oleh Pak Gubernur tadi, masyarakat Dayak yang banyak mendiami di dalam dan di luar hutan itu, dengan masyarakat pendatang, pengusaha, pemerintah daerah. Nah itu kalau itu terjadi, maka semua bisa diatasi masalah-masalah yang timbul di lapangan. Mungkin demikian Pak.
Thanks, Pak Risa. So I think we actually have two more questioners because I saw another hand. Let's take two more and then see how much time we have left. We now have still 14 minutes for the Q&A period. So keep your questions brief if you can.
Yeah, thanks, and hello everybody. My question is to be shared because we're lucky enough to have panelists from a range of sectors, including private sector, government, and civil society. I think it was great that we were all saying before that we all think we should be...
Sorry, who are you and where are you from?
Sorry, yeah, my name's Ben and I'm a PhD student at the University of Oxford. Sorry for forgetting that. So my question is to be shared because it was great that we were hearing everyone agree that we should work together. But I think we also know that it's more difficult than just saying we should work together. So it'd be even more great if we could perhaps push that a little bit further. And considering that we have kind of a panel from a range of sectors, it'd be great to hear from a panelist from each sector, private sector, civil society, and government, what they find most challenging in working with stakeholders from the other sectors, or the biggest challenge that they find in their sector in trying to collaborate with stakeholders from other sectors. Thanks.
Okay, great question. We'll try to answer that in 3 minutes. You have 1 minute each for each sector.
Can I start?
Yes.
The most challenging, we've been doing it for almost 4 years, right? So working with other private sector, there are a lot of other stakeholders, but let's just focus with working with other private sector players, is the different vision, different policy that they're implementing. For example, if I don't have to name names and area, but for example, when we wanted to protect certain forest peatland in certain landscape, the other private sector saying, no, I'm going to go ahead, I'm not going to protect this, because they don't have the same policy of protection of forested peat. So the biggest challenge is the biggest one is change different policies. Number two, the other players do not want to change the business as usual. That's also, I think, a very, very big challenge from private sectors. Government, as partners, they are most supportive. I really like, the provincial government especially, they are very supportive with our efforts. Donor countries, I mean, in South Sumatra landscape, for example, we've been working with the UK, the Netherlands, and Norwegian government, so they're also quite supportive. So the most difficult one is actually working with the local neighbors in the landscape, in that particular landscape. Yeah.
So maybe Dr. Helena, you'd like to say something about the local neighborhood?
Sure. I would say that it's quite difficult to identify which sector that more challenging to work with, because I would say that it's really different from differ from site to site and from context to context. But I would probably just comment that the difficulties, I would say, due to several things, and one of the top thing I would say is trust. Because if you don't trust your neighbor, if you don't trust the person that that you meet in the meetings or in your daily lives, I would say that open dialogue, communications, and really, to be honest, having honest discussions, put the the information on the table, and make it very clear, which is in different contexts maybe not very strategic, but I think that's the key really to do that.
Okay. Pak Riza or Pak Dadi, would you like to comment?
Ya, saya ingin menambahkan penjelasan dari panelis-panelis yang telah menyampaikan penjelasan tadi. Saya lebih menyoroti pentingnya isu mainstreaming, pengaruh utamahan isu-isu perubahan iklim ke tingkat pemerintahan kabupaten kota, dan juga tidak kalah pentingnya ke lingkungan parlemen. Sebab tanpa adanya pemahaman yang baik tentang isu-isu perubahan iklim, walaupun ada kerjasama, tetapi akan sulit menghasilkan sesuatu yang diharapkan. Jadi masalah pemahaman, masalah persepsi itu harus dibangun dengan baik, baru kita bisa bekerja sama. Terima kasih.
Yeah, so it's not just about cooperation between private sector, civil society, and government, but within each of those, there's different perspectives, different interests, often conflicting interests, just to make things more complicated. Yes, I think we have time for 2 more questions, if they can be to the point. Yes, anyone else? Yes. Well, sorry, this one, you're waiting to ask a question? Yes. So 1 more. And if you keep it very short, we'll have 2 more. Okay. Yeah.
I thought that gentleman over there has been raising his
hand
since 5 minutes.
Why
you don't want to give him that?
We'll make time for both of you, but please keep your questions short.
Okay, thank you. My name is Anja Lillingrama. I'm from the Rainforest Foundation, Norway. I have a question for Ibu Aida. I mean, we greatly appreciate the efforts that the APP has been doing recently in order to stop deforestation and to engage in the landscape approach and restoration. Still, there is a legacy of land grabbing and social conflicts in Indonesia, also for APP. So I would like to follow up on the question that was posed yesterday from Mina Setra from Aman, posed to Tony from April, whether there was any possibility for companies like April, APP to rightfully compensate for previous land grabbing, social conflicts by giving back land, other forms of compensation to the communities that's been deprived of their access to forest and land rights. Thank you.
So, Ibu Aida, that's for
you.
Okay.
Our zero deforestation policy, I'm sure, I cannot speak on behalf of April, but I'm sure April has a very similar policy, is basically the free and prior informed consent and social conflict resolutions system is definitely embedded in the zero deforestation policy. So I received this question earlier this morning on the morning panel. Would you give the land back to indigenous community who has legitimate right? I mean, it's a given. Indigenous community has legitimate right. Of course, it's already covered with the free and prior informed consent and the social conflict resolution system that we also adapted some of them from best practice, including Aman as well.
But what if this happened in the past before you adopted the policy? I think the question is about
it is
historical.
So this is how
situation.
this is how you implement free and prior informed consent. I'm not an expert, but I try to explain it as much as I can. So if you start a new activity, this is where you implement free and prior informed consent.
Right.
For example, establishment of a new plantation, establishment of new mill, a new annual cutting, expansion of canal, I don't know. So a new activity requires free and prior informed consent. But since our policy was launched in 2013 and so many different policies from different companies, Wilmar, Cargill, everybody else, they recently have launched a policy in the last 5 years or so, right? So when they launched their policy, they have been operating for quite some time. So for established plantation, for example, either palm oil or pulpwood plantation, for established plantation, of course, you cannot implement free and prior informed consent because it's already been established. How can you get consent prior development if it's already established? So the way around it, basically, to implement a really robust social conflict resolutions. Basically, what it means is actually conduct social mapping, a conflict mapping, identify where the conflicts are located, what they are. We classify conflicts to 8 different typology. And if it's old village, indigenous community, it's a given. Come on, we have to protect their rights. But there are also land grabbing done by certain parties are also pretend to be local community, and then we need to basically verify this on the ground. Are they really a real community, local community, or there's some mafia backup behind them, basically trying to develop palm oil and sell it to Malaysia? It happens. So we do need to have a very robust system to verify what's going on the ground.
Okay.
If it's their right, of course, yes.
Sorry, I think we should stop there because I want time for 2 more questions. I'm sorry, it's hard to see because of the lights, but... Okay, and then please keep your question brief. If we have time, we'll get to a second one.
Hi, my name is Buster. I'm recently just with Greenpeace, but now with Papua. So another reality in Indonesia is our population growth is growth very fast, and this will be a challenge also in Indonesia, like REDD and the kind of thing, and spontaneous transmigration is happening also everywhere, including in the around the forest area. So basically, my question is to East Kalimantan experience, how the provincial government is tackling this issue. For example, like
population growth.
Yeah, population growth and expansion,
including immigration from other parts of Indonesia.
And second thing also, how the REDD initiative also correlate, for example, with the infrastructure development, which is building a road everywhere, entering the forest area, that also opening the space to bring the logs out. So
okay, that's 2 questions, but maybe Pak Riza, would you like to answer one or both of those, but we only have 2 minutes.
Iya, terima kasih Pak Tim. Kami ingin menjawab pertumbuhan penduduk selain daripada kelahiran, tetapi juga ada yang lebih besar di pengalaman kami Pak ya, itu adalah dari pendatang migran ya. Nah, di daerah kami mencoba menjawab itu dengan pelatihan Pak, dan memberikan kesempatan kepada pendatang tadi atau yang baru lahir, istilahnya ya pertambahan penduduk tadi, untuk menjadi plasma di kebun-kebun yang dibangun di daerah. Kemampuan mereka ya sudah kita tingkatkan dengan kerjasama dengan inti, yaitu perkebunan yang membuka di daerah paling dekat dengan penduduk asli di daerah tersebut dan pendatang. Itu yang kita lakukan, Pak, selama ini. Tapi baru 2 hari yang lalu, terus terang Pak Gubernur kami juga sudah cukup jenuh dengan pendatang ini, maka mengatakan bahwa untuk pemerintah kota, kalau Balikpapan sudah lama ya, salah satu kota di Kalimantan Timur itu tertutup kepada pendatang, kecuali yang mempunyai skill yang tinggi. Menyusul adalah kota Samarinda, karena masalah yang ada di perkotaan akibat pendatang ini sudah menyebabkan banyak persoalan, terutama masalah sosial yang begitu banyak dihadapi oleh pemerintah kota Samarinda. Sehingga gubernur mempunyai kebijakan baru, yaitu Samarinda sebagai daerah tertutup untuk pendatang baru. Sehingga diberikan kesempatan kepada wali kota untuk menata kembali daerahnya menjadi lebih baik untuk masalah sosial ekonomi. Mungkin itu, Pak Tim. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Pak Risa. So I'm going to give time for one more question, but please keep it brief. I'm told we have to end 5 minutes ahead of schedule for security reasons, but I'll take that time out of the last wrap-up section.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this interesting discussion. My name is Peter de Koning. I'm working as a consultant for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands and on the implementation of the Amsterdam Declarations. And my question was to come back to the start of the presentation on the fiscal side. I learned that a large part of the income of the province came from property tax. So I was very interested to learn how significant you think the REDD will be as a source of revenue, both for communities as well as for the province.
Okay. I think that's for you, Ibutisa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think the REDD would be a significant source of revenue. We, of course, need to carefully analyze just how much funding is coming into East Kalimantan, in particular, relative to the other sources of revenue that East Kalimantan has. And to be clear, the graph that I showed you is part of the revenue that East Kalimantan obtains as a whole. So it's part of the balancing fund that occurs between the central and regional governments. So there are, of course, other sources of funding, and what it means is that part of the revenue source that it has that directly correlates to an incentive to either use more land or use less land is pushing towards the regional government using more land because of the property tax. 90% of property tax generating from that region comes back to that region. But for example,
region is the district or the province?
Province and district.
Okay.
Yeah. So it goes to the province first, and then the district, and then down to village level. Other things, we're quite in consensus that productivity needs to be increased if we want land use to be sustainable. The East Kalimantan government has production goals as well as forest protection goals. But one of the things that I discussed yesterday with Pak Dadi is also things like where is East Kalimantan trying to grow? They're trying, for example, they're...
1 minute.
Yeah, sure. For example, they're developing a new port, an international port in Malloy, is it, Pak? And one of the ambitions for that port is that they can, export more commodities, palm oil, for example, that will generate, sustainable revenue for their economy. But the export tax that is generated from whatever downstreaming effort that's happening in East Kalimantan is not coming back to East Kalimantan. What does that mean, right? So I think that to understand how significant REDD is going to impact on the entire revenue of East Kalimantan, we need to understand these things first. We need to understand the existing dynamics within the existing fiscal systems in East Kalimantan.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's time for our closing remarks and wrap up. I will forego my closing remarks and invite Professor Dadi to give closing remarks. And we have for 3.5 minutes, Pak. 3,5 menit.
Baik, Pak Tim. Sebagai penutup saya ingin menyampaikan beberapa hal sebagai berikut. Yang pertama, bahwa Kalimantan Timur telah berkomitmen untuk mendukung program internasional mencegah kenaikan suhu permukaan bumi lebih dari 2 derajat Celcius. Oleh karena itu, pembangunan ekonomi di Kalimantan Timur diselaraskan dengan kepentingan pelestarian ekosistem dan daya dukung lingkungan. Tadi telah dijelaskan bahwa Kalimantan Timur baru saja mendeklarasikan Green Growth Compact. Green Growth Compact ini adalah satu wujud dukungan dan komitmen berbagai pihak di dalam mewujudkan pembangunan hijau di Kalimantan Timur. Apa-apa yang terkandung di dalam deklarasi Green Growth Compact itu selanjutnya akan dijabarkan dalam bentuk program kerja yang disesuaikan dengan berbagai tingkatan dan isu, dan termasuk antara lain program-program peningkatan pelindungan kawasan konservasi, kemudian program-program pemanfaatan sumber daya yang berkelanjutan, program-program peningkatan pertumbuhan ekonomi yang berkesinambungan, dan yang lebih penting adalah program-program yang arahnya memberikan manfaat pembangunan yang lebih besar dan luas bagi masyarakat. Di samping itu, perlu saya sampaikan juga bahwa Kalimantan Timur dalam rangka mendukung pertumbuhan hijau ini telah menyiapkan master plan untuk mitigasi dan adaptasi perubahan iklim yang nantinya akan dijadikan peraturan daerah. Keberadaan dokumen ini sangat penting karena bisa memberikan jaminan kepastian untuk pelaksanaan program-program mitigasi perubahan iklim, adaptasi perubahan iklim, dan termasuk juga pelaksanaan program REDD Plus untuk jangka panjang. Pemerintah Kalimantan Timur sangat terbuka untuk bekerja sama di dalam meningkatkan program-program perlindungan kawasan konservasi, pertumbuhan ekonomi hijau, dan pembangunan berbasis rendah emisi. Gubernur Kalimantan Timur dan Dewan Daerah Perubahan Iklim juga membuka ruang kerjasama yang seluas-luasnya untuk program-program yang arahnya bisa memperkuat program pembangunan hijau di Kalimantan Timur. Terima kasih, Pak Tim.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dadi. I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Please give them a round of applause. And thank you to the audience for your excellent questions and rapt attention. Especially thank you to Pak Gubernur from Kalimantan Barat for his comments. And I'd like to thank our hosts, the conveners and sponsors of this event.